I came out here for silence. 1,000 acres of it. After 10 years of drowning in corporate deadlines and city noise, I thought inheriting my grandfather's ranch would finally let me breathe again. Fresh air, open sky, soil that remembered my family's boots. That was the plan. Instead, the very first thing I saw when I unlocked the barn wasn't sunlight or dust or memories. It was a bright yellow violation notice taped to the old cedar door. On a Toyside soil disturbance. For a second I honestly laughed. I hadn't even unpacked my truck. Then I read the signature at the bottom. Marla Kensington, President, Juniper Ridge HOA. 5 hours on this land and some HOA was already claiming my barn, my road, my dirt. When I walked down the gravel drive to ask what kind of joke this was, Marla met me at the fence line, arms crossed, sunglasses on, talking like a queen, addressing a trespasser. "This road is under HOA jurisdiction," she said. "You'll need approval to use it." My road. On my ranch. What Marla didn't know, what none of them knew, was that their entire community paradise sat on a 100-year agricultural lease that expired months ago. And every inch of land they thought they ruled had quietly reverted back to me. She didn't know it yet, but the ground under her designer sandals wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. I grew up on this land in the way kids grow up around legends. My grandfather, Warren Adler, didn't tell stories the way other men did. He lived them. Every fence post, every wind-worn gate, every patch of rusted barbed wire had history wrapped around it like a second skin. He bought this ranch when he was 26, scraped together every penny from working cattle auctions and welding rigs until he could claim 1,000 acres of stubborn sun-baked earth, and he treated it with a kind of reverence you don't see much anymore. To him, land wasn't an investment, it was an inheritance you polished, protected, and passed on better than you found it. I spent my childhood summers following him around like a shadow, learning which soil held water after a long drought, how to fix a broken gate with nothing but wire and grit, and how to tell when a man's handshake meant something and when it didn't. Grandpa wasn't perfect, but he believed in 3 things with the kind of conviction people write on tombstones. Respect the land. Respect your neighbors. And never let bullies grow roots. I didn't understand that last lesson until I met Eldon. I first saw him the morning after that ridiculous HOA notice. A thin, stooped figure leaning on a mail post across the road, his denim shirt sun-faded, his face lined like cracked earth. He nodded as I walked by, not the nosy kind of neighbor nod, but the quiet, respectful sort men who've seen too much tend to give. "You must be Warren's grandson," he said, voice rough but warm. I introduced myself, and the way his eyes softened told me he'd known my grandfather well, maybe better than I ever had. "He was a good man," Eldon murmured, "the kind they don't make anymore." We talked for a few minutes, weather, cattle, the usual surface-level things, until I noticed him glance nervously toward Juniper Ridge, the HOA kingdom sitting like a shiny ornament in the middle of my ranch. The shift in his expression was small, but it wasn't the wind that made his shoulders tighten. "You live over there?" I asked gently. "For now," he said, though the way he said it made it sound more like a sentence than a choice. He hesitated a moment before continuing. "My wife June, she passed last winter." His voice cracked so softly I almost missed it. 64 years we had. She loved that place. Loved her garden. Loved the idea of community. He swallowed hard. But Marla, she made sure it wasn't home anymore. I waited. Grandpa always said you learn more by listening than speaking. And Eldon talked. Not out of gossip, not out of anger, but the way people talk when they've been holding something heavy for too long. He told me how Marla fined him $75 a day because his antique Farmall tractor, a red one he'd restored with June decades ago, was aesthetic clutter visible from the street. How she issued violation after violation even after his wife got sick and couldn't help him move it. How the board rejected his appeal because it set a dangerous precedent. $75 a day. For an old tractor sitting in the driveway of the house he'd lived in longer than the HOA had existed. And when June passed, the harassment didn't stop. It got worse. Noise violations when he ran his generator after a storm. Landscaping violations because he couldn't mow while grieving. Threats of legal action when he asked for extensions. Marla called it upholding community standards. Eldon called it what it was, cruelty wrapped in policy. The more he spoke, the more something cold started forming in my chest. The same chill I'd felt yesterday when Marla told me with absolute confidence that my ranch road belonged to her HOA. I had assumed she was just misinformed, maybe overzealous. But Eldon painted a different picture. This wasn't incompetence, this was a pattern, and he wasn't the only one. As we talked, I noticed other houses, each one immaculate, but with small signs of tension, blinds snapping shut when a golf cart rolled by. People stepping inside when Marla's silver SUV appeared, a neighborhood that looked perfect from far away. But up close, it had fear baked into the mortar. Warren kept them in check when he was alive, Eldon said, glancing at me with tired eyes. He didn't raise his voice often, but when he did, even Marla listened. After he died, he exhaled slowly. She saw an opening, and she's been filling it ever since. I looked out across the land my grandfather fought for, land he'd trusted me to protect, and for the first time since arriving I understood what he meant years ago when he told me, "Quiet places aren't always peaceful. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to speak." And standing there beside a grieving man bullied by the very people claiming to uphold community values, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about a violation notice on my barn. It was about every person Marla had trampled under the weight of her authority. And whether I wanted trouble or not, trouble had already found me. By the third morning on the ranch, I finally felt like I could breathe again. Coffee in hand, cool air rolling in from the east, birds cutting across the pale sky. For a few seconds it felt like the ranch I remembered. Quiet, steady, honest. I decided to drive into town, check in with the feed store, maybe pick up some lumber to fix the porch my grandfather never quite finished. I wasn't even a quarter mile down my own ranch road when I heard the whining buzz of an electric motor behind me. A golf cart, moving fast. I slowed, mostly out of curiosity. And that's when I saw her. Marla Kensington, Queen of Juniper Ridge, tyrant of good taste and laminated rulebooks, barreling down the gravel road in a white HOA-branded golf cart like she was responding to a national emergency. She skidded to a stop in front of my truck, blocking the path, dust swirling around her like storm clouds. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses, a blazer that didn't match the weather, and an expression that suggested she had personally built this land with her bare hands. "Sir," she said, raising her voice, like she was speaking to a trespasser, "this road is private. You are not authorized to drive heavy equipment through a community access lane." I blinked at her, once, slowly. "Ma'am," I said, leaning out the window, "this is my road, my ranch road. I'm driving to town." She gave a sharp laugh, high, brittle, and insultingly confident. No, she said, tapping on her tablet, "this is the Juniper Ridge Scenic Lane. According to our zoning map, it falls under HOA oversight. Your grandfather was grandfathered in, pardon the pun, but you are not." I stared at her in disbelief. "We're standing on my land," I said flatly. "Check your map again." She ignored me and stepped closer, placing one hand dramatically on the hood of my truck. "You need to leave the community through the main gate," she insisted. "This interior road is for resident use only." Interior road. On my ranch. I honestly didn't know whether to laugh or call a doctor for her. Before I could respond, Marla snapped her fingers, actually snapped, and two figures emerged from behind a row of manicured junipers I hadn't noticed. Two HOA enforcers. Not the casual neighborhood watch type. These two looked like middle-aged bouncers who had been denied real authority their entire lives and finally found a taste of it. The first one, Brent, had a clipboard and a deep V-neck shirt that didn't belong on a man in his 50s. The second, Lionel, wore a reflective vest labeled Compliance Unit. Compliance Unit. Lord, help me. "Gentlemen," Marla said, gesturing toward my truck like I was a misbehaving teenager, "this is the non-compliant resident I told you about." Resident? I hadn't lived here a full week, and she'd already assigned me a role in her kingdom. Brent stepped forward, flipping through his clipboard. "Mr. Adler," he said, squinting at the papers, "you are in violation of sightline obstruction regulations. The structure known as the barn is too close to the road and disrupts approved community aesthetics." I stared. "My barn? The one that's been standing here since "Yes," he said, not missing a beat. "Under Section 14, subsection B of HOA Visual Uniformity Standards, all outbuildings must be a minimum of 200 feet from any community driving route." A pause. A full, silent beat. "This isn't a community route," I said calmly. "This is my ranch road. My barn is on my property, and your regulations don't apply here." Lionel crossed his arms. "Failure to comply will result in fines of up to $500 per day, retroactive to your date of occupancy." I felt something twist in my chest, not quite anger. More like disbelief. They genuinely believed what they were saying. They truly thought they owned this land. My land. The same acres my grandfather bled for, sweated for, fought to preserve. Marla smiled like she'd won something. "You can contest the fines if you wish. The board meets every other Thursday. I can squeeze you in, 3 months from now." The dust settled. A mockingbird sang on a fence post. My coffee was still warm in the cup holder, and in that quiet moment something shifted in me. I stopped seeing Marla as a loud nuisance, stopped seeing these men as overzealous volunteers. No, these people weren't confused. They were convinced. Convinced the ranch belonged to them. Convinced their rules mattered here. Convinced I was a problem to be corrected. But unlike most of their victims, I knew what they didn't. Their entire community land rested on a lease older than living memory, a lease that expired months ago. A lease that returned every road, trail, and greenbelt to me. Marla straightened her blazer, pleased with herself. I expect cooperation, she said. I put the truck in reverse, meeting her eyes in the mirror. You'll get something, I said softly, just not what you expect. And as I rolled away, calm and steady, dust curling behind me, I couldn't help thinking, these people have no idea how badly they just stepped into the wrong fight. I drove straight to town after the so-called HOA patrol blocked my road. I wasn't angry, not yet. I'd seen enough nonsense in corporate boardrooms to know when people were bluffing with authority they didn't actually have. But what Marla and her compliance unit pulled this morning, that wasn't confusion. That was entitlement wearing a badge. Julia Barrington's law office sat in an old brick building, squeezed between a bakery and a hardware store. She had been my grandfather's attorney for almost 30 years, and she greeted me with the same firm handshake she'd always given him. Sharp eyes, cropped gray hair, the kind of woman who could tame a courtroom with a raised eyebrow. You're earlier than I expected, she said, leading me to her office. I'm guessing you met the HOA. You could say that. I told her everything, the violations, the fake jurisdiction, the $500 a day fine for a barn older than the HOA itself. She listened without interrupting, though her expression tightened the moment I mentioned Marla Kensington. Sit, she said finally. There's something you need to see. She opened a thick file on her desk and slid out several yellowed papers, the edges soft from age, large looping signatures, county stamps so faded they looked hand-drawn. This, Julia said, tapping the top document, is the original 1922 agricultural lease between your great-grandfather and the Juniper Ridge Settlement Committee. I leaned forward. I'd heard stories about old agreements, but I always assumed they were just family lore tales told over supper but long buried in legal archives. It was a 100-year lease, Julia continued, designed to allow the settlers to build homes while still paying rent in the form of annual crop shares. In modern terms, it's essentially a large-scale land use contract. My eyes drifted over the lines. One phrase stood out like a lighthouse in fog. Lease termination 100 years from date of signing. Renewal requires express written consent of landowner. I looked up at her. Julia, that lease expired last year. She nodded. 6 months ago, to be exact, and your grandfather did not renew it. He made his position very clear during the final years of his life. If the community wanted to stay, they would have to negotiate fairly. I sat back, the weight of the revelation sinking into my bones. So the homes? The homeowners own their structures, she said, but the land beneath every road, every greenbelt, every walking trail, and all community spaces including their clubhouse, legally reverted to the Adler Ranch the moment the lease expired. I let out a slow breath. They have no idea. They were informed, she said calmly. 5 certified notices mailed by my office, 1 year before expiration, 6 months before, 90 days, 30 days, and a final notice 2 weeks after expiration. No response? Julia folded her hands. The tracking numbers confirmed delivery. Someone signed for every letter, but the HOA never responded, and from what you just told me, it seems they never informed the residents either. Of course they didn't. Telling the truth would have meant losing control. Julia slid another document across the desk. This is the post-expiration land status. As of now, Juniper Ridge has no legal claim to the infrastructure they are regulating. Your grandfather intended to renegotiate, but he passed before anything formal could be arranged. I rubbed my forehead, the magnitude of the situation clicking into place like puzzle pieces. So, if they want to keep using the roads, they need your permission, and if the HOA wants authority over anything, they would need to lease the land from you, or purchase it at a very high valuation. She paused. But given their behavior, I doubt they've saved the funds required for a purchase. I thought about Eldon's trembling voice when he talked about June, about the fines stacked against him, about Marla cutting through my road like she owned the soil. I don't want a war, I said quietly. I want peace. I want people like Eldon safe. I want reasonable agreements that let everyone live their lives. Julia's expression softened. Your grandfather said the same thing, but he also said something else. Something I think you need to hear." She leaned back in her chair. "People like Marla don't negotiate. They escalate, they bluff, they bully, and when they feel power slipping, they double down." Outside the window, cars drifted by in the lazy afternoon light, unaware that an entire community was built on a lie that was about to crack open. "She threatened to fine me from my barn, Julia," I said. "And it's sitting on my own ranch road." Julia gave a short, dry laugh. "Oh, they're in for a surprise." A long moment passed before she continued. "I can draft a formal offer," she said. "A fair annual land use lease. Reasonable, affordable, transparent. If they accept, wonderful. If they refuse," she gestured to the stack of documents, "you have every legal right to enforce your ownership." I stared at the papers again, the faded ink, the century-old signatures, the weight of history pressing down on the present. "Send the offer," I said finally. "Give them a chance to do this the right way." Julia nodded. "I'll send it today." As I stood to leave, she added one last warning. "Stuart, be ready. Because when people build their kingdoms on borrowed ground, they don't step down gracefully." And as I walked out of her office, lease documents in hand, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marla Kensington had picked the wrong land to claim. The next morning started out the way I wished all mornings here would start. Cool air sliding off the hills, the smell of sun-warmed hay, and a sky so wide it made you forget people like Marla Kensington even existed. I brewed coffee, stepped outside, and let myself believe for one peaceful moment that yesterday's nonsense might have been a fluke. Then I heard the engines. Not trucks, not tractors. Something smaller, gas-powered, repetitive. A buzzing mechanical hum cutting through the quiet like an insult. I set my mug down and followed the noise toward the south pasture, toward the line where my grandfather and I planted a row of heritage pecan saplings 10 years ago. Those trees meant something to him, to us. He planted them the summer my father died, said the land needed new life to balance out the loss. Each sapling had a story, a memory, a fingerprint of family history. I reached the crest of the hill and saw them, 4 people in yellow vests, HOA vests, small fleet of weed trimmers, shovels, and one man with a chainsaw who looked entirely too excited to be holding it. My stomach dropped. 3 saplings were already gone, cut down clean at the base, the exposed wood pale and raw. Another worker was digging up the roots of the next one like he was pulling a stubborn weed. "Hey," I shouted, picking up my pace. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" They didn't stop, they didn't even look embarrassed. The man with the chainsaw adjusted his grip and stepped toward the next tree like I was background noise. I broke into a jog, gravel crunching under my boots. When I reached them, the woman holding a clipboard turned around with a practiced smile. "Good morning. We're the Juniper Ridge Landscaping Committee. You should have received a notice. These trees violate emergency access safety standards." I stared at her, hard. "We're in the middle of my ranch," I said. "There is no emergency access here except for the one cattle trail I maintain. You're more than a half-mile from the nearest HOA boundary." She tapped her clipboard. "According to our mapping software, this section is adjacent to a designated community perimeter. Obstructions within 50 feet are required to be removed." I glanced behind her at my trees, the ones my grandfather and I planted together, the ones meant to outlive both of us, now lying in fresh sawdust. "That map is wrong," I said quietly. "And even if it weren't, you don't have the authority to step foot onto my land, much less destroy anything." She shrugged. A tiny, indifferent gesture. Then she said the one sentence that made something cold settle into my bones. "We have full support from President Kensington." Of course they did. As if summoned, Marla appeared a moment later, coming down the trail in a pair of spotless white sneakers and holding her phone up like she was documenting a crime scene. She had a grin, small, tight, brittle, like she had been waiting for this moment. "There he is," she said loudly, as if speaking to an invisible audience. "The resident who refuses to comply, please continue recording." "I'm not a resident," I said through clenched teeth. "You are standing on Adler Ranch property without permission. Your crew has destroyed protected trees." Marla angled her phone closer. "I am filming this interaction for safety purposes. You are raising your voice at HOA volunteers and creating an unsafe environment." I wasn't raising my voice. Not yet. I took a deep breath. "Put the phone down, Marla. Call off your crew. Step off my land." She widened her eyes theatrically. "Threatening me now. Are you hearing this, Brent? Lionel?" The chainsaw buzzed louder. Another sapling fell. I stepped forward, but not toward her. toward the man holding the chainsaw. "Turn it off," I said. "Right now." He hesitated, glanced at Marla. "Don't stop," she snapped. "We are within our rights." He raised the chainsaw again. I reached out, grabbed a handful of dead branches from the fallen pecan, and tossed them between us. Not a weapon, just a message. "Turn it off." The worker finally cut the engine. Silence settled over the pasture like dust after a storm. Marla lowered the phone just enough to look me in the eye. "You are digging yourself into a deeper hole," she hissed. "Every aggressive action will be documented, and we will win." I didn't respond. Not to her. I looked down at the saplings. Barked, stripped, roots torn, a decade of memory cut down in 20 careless minutes. My grandfather's voice echoed somewhere inside me. "You protect what's honest in this world, even if you stand alone." Before I could say anything, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, shuffling. Familiar. Eldon. He stood there with his hat in his hands, sorrow carved into every line of his face. When he saw the fallen trees, he exhaled softly, almost like a prayer. "She's escalating," he said quietly. "Marla never loses, Stuart. She makes sure of it." I swallowed hard. "I don't want to fight, Eldon." He nodded. "I know, but she does." He was right. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't miscommunication. This was the opening shot of a war I hadn't asked for. And I realized something then. Something simple, ancient and absolute. If I didn't draw a line right now, she'd take everything she could reach. I knelt down, touched the stump of a sapling, and felt the roughness of the fresh cut. "I'm done waiting," I said. Eldon looked at me carefully. "What are you going to do?" I stood, brushing dirt from my jeans. "What my grandfather taught me." I pointed at the boundary, where my land met theirs. The faded posts, the sagging wire, the markers worn by weather and time. "I'm going to rebuild every fence on this ranch. Strong, higher, clear, visible, and unbreakable." Eldon nodded, the smallest spark of hope in his tired eyes. Marla was still filming, still smirking, still convinced she owned the world. But as I walked away from the ruins of the pecan grove, one thing became undeniable. She had crossed into my land. Now it was time I reminded her where my land ended, and where her power did too. I spent the next 2 days doing what my grandfather would have done, working the land with purpose. No shouting, no drama, just action. By sunrise each morning, I had a post driver in my hands and new cedar piles stacked on the truck bed. By noon, a clean, unbroken line of boundary markers stretched across the pasture like fresh stitches closing an old wound. Even Eldon stopped by once, leaning on the fence with quiet approval. "Your granddad would be proud," he murmured. I hoped he was right, but while I rebuilt fences on the ground, I built something else above it. Eyes. Motion-triggered trail cameras, high enough to avoid tampering, angled toward the weak points where someone might try to cross. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared, and on the third night, preparation paid off. It was just after 11. I'd finished sorting tools in the barn and was ready to turn in when my phone buzzed. A notification from the south pasture camera. I tapped the feed. 3 figures. Dark clothes. Gloves. Moving fast. They weren't HOA volunteers. These weren't clipboard warriors in neon vests. These men were purposeful, quiet, efficient. They moved with the confidence of people who'd done this kind of work before. One was pulling up fresh fence posts I'd set less than 6 hours earlier. Another tossed wire cutters into the grass. The third carried a red fuel can. My stomach tightened. That can wasn't for clearing brush. It was for sending a message. I grabbed the shotgun from its rack, not because I wanted trouble, but because I knew enough rural law to understand that showing up unarmed against men who came to burn wasn't bravery. It was stupidity. I stepped outside, boots crunching softly on the gravel. The night air was sharp, the moon low behind a bank of clouds, the pasture dim and shifting with shadows. As I approached the fence line, I stayed in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. The men didn't see me. They were too focused on their work. "Spread the accelerant on the brush pile," the fuel can man whispered. "We torch it and go." So that was the plan. Burn the pile near the barn. Let the flames jump. Destroy equipment. Maybe the barn itself, all while claiming some accidental fire hazard caused the spread. Classic intimidation. I stepped forward, making sure they heard my footsteps slow, deliberate, steady. "That's far enough." All 3 froze. The man with the fuel can turned first. Even in the low light I saw the flash of irritation on his face. Not fear. Irritation, like I had ruined his evening plans. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. My land, I said calmly. My fence, my barn, and that fuel can isn't leaving this property lit. The tallest one squared his shoulders. We're with the Community Safety Initiative. Just clearing fire hazard. Funny, I said. Real fire crews don't usually bring bolt cutters. He stiffened. I raised the shotgun, not aiming, just holding it level. A promise, not a threat. You've got 10 seconds to drop the tools and walk away. The man with the fuel can smirked and took half a step forward. You won't shoot. Try me, I said. My voice didn't shake. Not even a little. I'm not aiming at you, but if you take one more step toward my barn, I'll make damn sure this night ends different than you planned. The smirk faded. They exchanged glances, silent communication bouncing between them. Should we rush him? One whispered. I didn't blink. Didn't give them anything but iron stillness. You could, I said. But you wouldn't make it across this field before the sheriff hears about 3 unidentified men caught on camera committing arson. That landed harder than the shotgun ever could. Camera? The tall one muttered. I nodded toward the tree line. Wave. You're live right now. That broke them. The man with the fuel can cursed under his breath. The bolt cutter guy dropped his tool. The third one shoved his hands into his pockets, backing away, eyes darting like a cornered dog. Let's go, the tall one snapped. They retreated toward the dirt road, scrambling into a beat-up black pickup. In their rush, one of them dropped something in the grass, a phone that skidded toward my boots. The engine roared, tires spun. The truck fishtailed once and vanished down the county road. I waited until the sound faded before lowering the shotgun. Then I picked up the phone, cracked screen, unlocked, notifications glowing, a message thread open at the top. Sender MK, do it tonight. No more delay. Payment released. Last half after it's done. Attached a partial screenshot of a digital payment. MK, Marla Kensington. I exhaled slowly, anger settling into something colder. Clarity. This wasn't pettiness. This wasn't HOA theatrics. This was sabotage. Criminal. Calculated. Intentional. And now I had proof. I drove straight into town the next morning, walked into the sheriff's office, placed the cracked phone on the counter, and said the one sentence I had been avoiding for days. I need to file a report. Deputy Harlan raised an eyebrow. On what ground? Attempted property damage, I said. And conspiracy. He picked up the phone, scrolled through the messages, and his face darkened. We'll send someone to collect statements, he said. And you should know this isn't the first complaint involving your HOA president, but it's the clearest evidence we've ever had. I nodded. It won't be the last. As I walked back toward my truck, the morning sun crested the ridgeline, spilling light across the ranch. For once, it didn't feel warm. It felt like a spotlight, on them, on me, on the fight that had officially begun. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and tension, a single thought hardened into resolve. Marla Kensington had escalated. Now it was my turn. I didn't have to wonder long about how Marla would respond after the sheriff took the phone into evidence. She went silent for exactly 1 day, then she exploded. Julia drafted the notices on official letterhead clean, formal, courteous, and impossible to ignore. Every homeowner in Juniper Ridge received a certified envelope inviting them to a mandatory legal information session regarding land access, property titles, easements, and potential liability issues affecting the entire community. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't threatening, it was simply serious, the way real legal matters are. Inside each notice, Julia included a simple line summarizing the expired agricultural lease in plain language. The land beneath all common areas in Juniper Ridge reverted to Adler Ranch as of 6 months ago. Residents didn't react quietly. By noon the next day, the HOA Facebook group was on fire. I knew because Eldon called me, practically whispering like the walls had ears. She's telling folks you're trying to seize their homes, he said. Claims you're a developer planning to bulldoze everything from the clubhouse to the walking trails. Developer? I muttered. I can barely get my tractor to start. She's calling you a fraud, Eldon continued. Says the meeting is a scam. Says if people attend, they're falling for your fear tactics. But Julia had anticipated that. Her notice was too official, too grounded in county-verified documents to dismiss with a Facebook rant. And fear cuts both ways. People weren't just scared of me. They were scared of losing their property value, scared of losing access to the only road leading to their homes. scared that the HOA had lied to them. By the time the meeting rolled around, the town hall parking lot looked like a county fair. Cars lined the road. Families carried folders of mortgage documents and printouts of the notice. People stood in tight clusters whispering, looking around like they were crossing enemy lines just by showing up. I stayed near the back, not out of shyness, out of strategy. Tonight wasn't about me, it was about truth. Julia was already at the podium, sorting maps and papers with the calm precision of someone who had done this 100 times. When she glanced my way, she didn't need to speak. Her eyes said it clearly, "Let me handle this." The room filled fast, too fast. Close to 100 people took their seat. Even more stood along the walls. The air buzzed with tension. Marla arrived last. She stormed in like a storm cell, tight smile, stiff posture, voice louder than necessary as she greeted her remaining loyal board members. But even they looked pale. Nervous. Something in the air had shifted, and they felt it. Julia stepped to the microphone. "Good evening," she said. "My name is Julia Barrington, legal counsel for Adler Ranch. Thank you all for attending." Murmurs rippled through the room. People clutched notebooks. Few had their phones out, recording. "I understand there has been confusion," Julia continued. "Tonight's purpose is simple: clarity, facts only. No accusations, no assumptions, no politics, just truth." She clicked a remote. The projector lit up with an old survey map, large, detailed, stamped with the county seal. "This," she said, using a laser pointer, "is the original Adler Ranch property filed with the county in 19. The boundaries shown here have never changed." She clicked again. A second map appeared, modern, crisp, outlining Juniper Ridge. "And this," she said, "is your current development." Then the overlay appeared. The two maps merged, and suddenly the room saw it. Every road, every cul-de-sac, every trail, every drainage ditch, every greenbelt, every pocket park, even the land under the clubhouse. All of it sat squarely inside Adler Ranch. Gasps spread like a wave. Julia let the reaction settle before continuing. In 1922, the Juniper Ridge Agricultural Settlement Committee entered into a 100-year land use lease with Mr. Harold Adler. This lease permitted the early community to operate on his land while paying annual agricultural fees. Another click, a photocopy of the original lease filled the screen, signatures looping across the bottom. "That lease," Julia said, "expired 6 months ago." The reaction was immediate: sharp inhalations, murmurs, people straightening in their chairs. "This cannot be real," someone whispered. "Did the HOA know about this?" a woman demanded. Julia raised a sealed folder. "My office sent their board 5 certified notices. All were signed for, none were acknowledged, none were shared with the homeowners." Dozens of heads turned toward Marla. She sat perfectly still, except for the twitch in her jaw. Julia continued, "As of today, the land beneath your community's common property legally reverted to Adler Ranch. Your homes belong to you, but the roads leading to them do not, nor do the trails, drainage systems, parks, or shared facilities. This is not speculation, this is binding law." Panic simmered. A man in the third row stood up. "Why didn't our HOA tell us? This affects our mortgages, our access, our insurance." Another voice added, "Why didn't they negotiate a renewal?" Julia's tone remained steady. "That is a question only your board can answer." Then she pulled up the next slide. A financial statement. Numbers highlighted in yellow. "This," she said, "is the HOA reserve fund from 18 months ago, $223,000. Another slide, the same fund 3 months later, $43,000. A collective gasp erupted. "What happened to $80,000? Someone shouted. Julia clicked again. Another document appeared, an invoice. Consulting fee, $80,000. Recipient Kensington Property Advisory Owner, Peter Kensington, Marla's cousin. The room went silent in a way silence shouldn't sound, humiliating. Accusing, Julia didn't pause. Next slide, emails. From Marla Kensington to, a local realtor, subject, HOA, inquiry. Ignore the expired lease claim, it is a rumor. All land belongs to the HOA, I will handle any questions. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. A young couple exchanged horrified looks. Even Brent and Lionel, the so-called compliance unit, looked pale. Someone finally snapped. "You lied to us," a man yelled at Marla. "You lied about everything. You spent our money," another cried. "My husband and I asked you directly about land ownership," a woman shouted. "You looked us in the eyes and said everything was secure." Voices layered atop each other, anger, shock, betrayal. Marla stood abruptly. "This is a setup," she pointed at me, voice cracking. "He is manipulating all of you. He wants to take your homes." Julia calmly lifted a single sheet of paper. "This is the renewal offer Adler Ranch sent to the HOA 6 months ago. A fair annual lease, reasonable terms." They ignored it. The paper trembled slightly in Marla's peripheral vision. Not because Julia's hand shook, hers never did. Because Marla knew the room had stopped believing her. I didn't say a word, I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. The last thing I saw that night as the meeting dissolved into chaos was Marla's expression, cornered, cracking, desperate. A woman who built her kingdom on borrowed land, and just realized the landowner finally showed up. The county didn't waste time. 3 days after the town hall imploded, the county planning board announced an emergency hearing, not a discussion, not a workshop, a legally binding, recorded, on the public record hearing. That alone told me everything. They already knew this wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. This was a structural failure of governance, sitting on top of expired land. When I pulled into the county building, the parking lot was already overflowing. News vans, pickup trucks, HOA members in pastel sweaters, ranchers in denim and boots. Half the town had shown up. Inside, the boardroom looked like a courtroom mid-trial, rows of folding chairs, microphones wired to speakers, a raised dais with 5 county commissioners staring down over reading glasses. Julia sat beside me, calm as ever. "It'll get loud," she warned. "Let it." I didn't need to ask what she meant. Marla was already seated at the opposite table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they hadn't slept since the town hall. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless, but her eyes were sharp with panic. She kept flipping through a binder so aggressively the pages bent. When the chairman, a gray-bearded man named Porter, banged his gavel, the room quieted like someone hit a switch. "This emergency hearing," he began, "concerns the land status of Juniper Ridge, the HOA's handling of resident disclosures, and allegations of misuse of community funds." A murmur rippled through the crowd. He continued, "We will hear from residents, HOA representatives, and counsel for Adler Ranch. Let's proceed." He nodded toward the first speaker. Eldon stood. I didn't expect that. He hadn't told me he planned to testify. But as he approached the microphone, hat in trembling hands, posture stiff but dignified, I realized he wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for June, for himself, for everyone who'd been stepped on and told to thank the person doing the stepping. "My name is Eldon Brooks," he said. His voice cracked, but he cleared it gently. "I've lived in Juniper Ridge since I never thought I'd have to stand here." He described the tractor fines, the $75 a day, the refusal to grant extensions while his wife was dying, the notices taped to his front door like marks of shame. People listened, not just politely, with pain, with anger. "She planted marigolds every spring." Eldon said softly, "It was the only thing that made her smile near the end. And the HOA said they violated color regulations. They threatened to fine us." She cried every night that week, thinking she'd ruined the neighborhood. He swallowed hard. "That woman there," he pointed at Marla, without anger, just truth. "She broke her spirit long before sickness did." Marla shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the board for rescue. None came. The chairman nodded somberly. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." Then he called the next speakers, a young couple I recognized from the town hall. They wheeled a stroller up with them, a tiny toddler inside holding a stuffed elephant. The husband spoke first. "When our daughter was born, we built a small ramp at the front door. She has mobility issues, nothing major, just needs support." His wife finished for him. "The HOA fined us $50 a day, saying disability modifications required pre-approval. We begged them for leniency. They said we were disrupting aesthetic harmony." Someone in the audience cursed under their breath. The woman's voice trembled. "We weren't trying to change the neighborhood. We were just trying to help our daughter enter her own home." Then she looked directly at Marla. "You called it an eyesore. She's 3 years old. Even the commissioners stiffened at that. Marla's jaw clenched. She grabbed her microphone. "That's not accurate," she said sharply. "We simply asked for compliance. If they had followed the correct procedures." The chairman held up a hand. "You'll have your turn, Kensington." She sat back, fuming. Dozens more residents spoke. Small stories, big stories, all the same shape: unreasonable fines, ignored appeals, threats, harassment, a culture of fear. By the time resident testimony ended, the room felt charged, like the air before lightning. People weren't just frustrated, they were awake now. Then Chairman Porter turned to Marla. "Miss Kensington, you may respond." She stood, straightening her blazer, drawing herself tall, like a general taking the field. "Everything said today," she began, "is a misinterpretation of the facts. This community thrives because of my leadership, my rules, my oversight. Without structure, it would descend into chaos." Her voice grew sharper. "I am the one who upheld standard. I am the one who kept property values high. I am the one who," she pointed at me, "prevented this man from exploiting a loophole to seize our land." The crowd erupted. Shouts, protests, disbelief. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly. Marla plowed forward anyway. "He is manipulating century-old paperwork to steal our community, my community. I refuse to let Juniper Ridge fall into the hands of someone who—" "That's enough," Porter snapped. Marla whirled toward him, eyes blazing. "You don't understand. Without me, these people wouldn't know how to run a neighborhood. I built Juniper Ridge. I created its identity. I am its authority." The room fell silent. A dangerous, heavy silence. Even her own board members leaned away from her like she had suddenly become a live wire. Porter exhaled slowly, then set down his gavel. "Miss Kensington," he said, voice low, "you have just confirmed every concern raised here tonight." Julia rose beside me. "Mr. Chairman, may I present the renewal offer Adler Ranch sent 6 months ago?" He nodded. She handed it over, a neatly drafted, completely reasonable lease proposal. Porter skimmed it, looked at Marla, looked at the crowd. Then he spoke the sentence that broke the room open. "The county cannot uphold public services across land that no longer belongs to the HOA. Therefore, the HOA has 30 days to reach a good faith agreement with Adler Ranch. If not, the county will terminate all utility easements across his private property." A wave of shock passed through the room. "You can't do that," Marla shrieked. "We already have the legal precedent," Porter said calmly. "And frankly, Miss Kensington, your behavior throughout this hearing has made it clear where the obstruction lies." People began muttering, loudly. Some shouting, some cheering. A man stood up and yelled, "Recall," a woman echoed. "Get her out." Within seconds, someone near the front pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote "Recall petition" across the top. People swarmed toward it, signing with frantic determination. Marla watched in horror as her loyal community turned their backs on her. "This isn't over," she shouted. "I'm still the president. You can't." But nobody listened. They were too busy reclaiming the power she'd stolen from them. And as the room erupted into a storm of signatures and angry voices, I stood in the back, quiet, steady, unshaken, not because I'd won anything yet, but because the truth had finally been spoken out, loud, and there was no taking it back now. By the time the county hearing adjourned and the recall petition filled half a clipboard, things were already in motion that Marla Kensington couldn't stop. Not with charm, not with intimidation, and not with whatever fragile sense of authority she still clung to. The sheriff's office wasn't the type to act quickly on neighborhood feuds. But sabotage, arson attempts, falsified financial records, and a phone full of incriminating messages? That was different. That was criminal. 2 days after the hearing, Sheriff Porter himself drove up my ranch road in a dusty Tahoe, lights off, expression grim. He didn't bother with small talk. "We've got enough," he said. "A judge signed the warrant this morning." I nodded once, feeling a strange mix of relief and inevitability. "For Marla?" "And anyone else involved," he confirmed. "Your trail cameras saved us 6 months of investigation." He paused. "You want to know what broke the case?" I raised an eyebrow. The treasurer flipped. I hadn't expected that. The treasurer, a thin, nervous man named Harold Rice, always looked like someone had wrung him out and hung him over the railing to dry. Apparently his conscience couldn't tolerate the HOA's unraveling. "Came into the station with a shoebox full of documents," Porter said. "Bank statements, handwritten notes, internal emails, everything." "What did he say?" that he was done lying. Porter gave a humorless chuckle, and that Marla threatened to pin the financial mess on him if things ever went south. It didn't surprise me. Marla's leadership philosophy had always been simple: win at any cost, and if you can't win, burn the scoreboard. Is she home? I asked. Porter nodded, but not for long. The sheriff's convoy rolled into Juniper Ridge at noon on a Saturday. Perfect timing, really. The HOA board often scheduled minor emergency meetings on weekends, mostly to assert dominance over anyone who valued their free time. Today, the emergency was real. Residents watched from windows and porches as two cruisers and a county SUV pulled up outside Marla's house. She opened the door dressed like she'd been expecting guests: white blouse, pearls, hair curled to stiff perfection. The moment she saw the officers, her smile faltered. "What is this?" she demanded. Porter stepped forward. "Miss Kensington, we have a warrant for your arrest. Multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit property damage, fraud, and falsifying financial records." She recoiled. "This is outrageous. I am the president of Juniper Ridge." "Not anymore," someone muttered from across the street. Marla glanced around wildly, at the neighbors who once bowed to her authority. Now they were spectators. Some recording, some whispering, some flat-out glower. She pointed at Porter. "You don't understand, this is a mistake. Those men weren't hired by me. I've never seen them in my life." Porter held up the printed screenshots, the texts from MK, the digital payment confirmation, the time-stamped messages outlining the plan. Marla's face drained of color. Those aren't, you can't prove, you can explain it to the judge." When the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the neighborhood exhaled, one long, collective breath they'd been holding for years. For the first time, Marla's voice cracked, not from anger, but "You're all going to regret this," she said, eyes sweeping over the residents. "Without me, this community will fall apart." But no one answered her, not one. She was loaded into the cruiser, door shut softly, almost kindly, as if the sheriff wanted to give her that dignity since she had denied it to so many others. As the cars pulled away, Eldon appeared beside me on the sidewalk. He watched the convoy disappear, expression thoughtful, not triumphant. "Strange feeling," he murmured, "seeing justice walk out your front door." The trial began 6 months later. If the town hall had been crowded, the courthouse was overflowing. They had to open a second room with a live feed for people who couldn't fit inside. Marla arrived in a tailored suit, her hair stiff with hairspray, acting like the entire proceeding was an inconvenience. But the moment witnesses were called, her composure fractured piece by piece. Eldon testified first, when he described the harassment during June's illness. Several jurors looked away, visibly shaken. His voice was steady, but grief threaded through every word. A young mother testified next about the disabled ramp. "She told us," the woman said through tears, "that if our daughter needed special accommodations, she belonged somewhere else." Marla shifted in her seat, fidgeting with her bracelet, jaw locked. Then the HOA treasurer took the stand. Gone was the shrinking, anxious man. In his place stood someone who had finally found the courage buried under years of fear. "She instructed me to falsify invoices," he said. "Told me the community didn't need to know where the money was going." "What did she say exactly?" the prosecutor asked. The treasurer swallowed. "She said, people don't need truth, they need control." A ripple passed through the courtroom. Julia's turn came next. She laid out everything: the expired agricultural lease, the certified letters, the lack of response, the deliberate cover-up. She explained the legal consequences, the financial risks, the attempt to sabotage my barn, but it was the investigator's testimony that sealed the verdict. "Miss Kensington received every notice," he said. "We obtained courier signatures, we recovered deleted emails acknowledging the expiration. Evidence shows the HOA intentionally withheld this information from homeowners." Even Marla couldn't fake confidence anymore. She slumped deeper and deeper into her chair, staring ahead like someone watching their world collapse in slow motion. When the prosecutor presented the phone recovered from the field, the messages from MK, the payment screenshot, Marla finally snapped. "That proves nothing," she shouted. "Everyone is against me. This whole thing is a conspiracy." "Miss Kensington," the judge warned, "sit down." She didn't. "You're all ungrateful," she screamed, pointing wildly. "I protected that neighborhood. I built order out of chaos. Without me, it's nothing. Nothing. The judge slammed the gavel so hard the bailiff flinched. "That will be enough," he said, voice echoing like thunder. Silence drowned the room. When the jury returned with the verdict, no one was surprised. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentence was measured and firm. 3 to 5 years in state prison for fraud and conspiracy. 18 additional months for falsifying financial documents. Full restitution to affected residents. Marla stood there shaking, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She looked small, not powerful, not intimidating, just small. When they led her away in handcuffs, she didn't scream anymore. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't tell anyone they'd regret it. She just stared at the floor, finally understanding she couldn't bend the world to her will. 2 weeks after the verdict, the homeowners voted to dissolve the Juniper Ridge HOA entirely, over 90% in favor. A new community association formed, simple, voluntary, neighborly, no fines, no committees, no rulers pretending to be monarchs. Eldon became part of it. So did the young family with the ramp. People helped each other again. Roads were maintained cooperatively. Parks reopened without pointless restrictions. Juniper Ridge wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, it was peaceful. And as I walked the length of my now secure fence line one evening, watching the sunset catch on the repaired posts, I realized something. Justice hadn't been loud. Justice hadn't been dramatic. It had simply been earned. One truth at a time, one step at a time, one line drawn in the dirt. When the legal dust finally settled and Juniper Ridge voted joyfully, unanimously to dissolve the HOA, the community felt like a place taking its first deep breath in years. People walked slower, smiled more, looked each other in the eye again. But the real change started the day I bought the old HOA community barn. It sat at the edge of the greenbelt, a weathered structure the HOA had always treated like some sacred administrative fortress, off limits unless you had a badge, a form, or an approved reason for living near it. The irony, of course, was that the barn was nearly as old as my ranch. My grandfather used to store hay there before the early settlers carved out Juniper Ridge. The HOA painted it beige and slapped a keypad on the door, but underneath that it was still ours. Still part of the land. I bought it at auction for $1. Then I spent a month restoring it, pulling off the ugly siding, sanding the old beams, replacing the warped doors with a wide sliding entrance that opened toward the sunset. I added picnic tables, string lights, a little stage in the corner for weekend music. No locks, no restriction, no board approval form. I called it Ranch Commons. Open to everyone, free to everyone. Exactly the way community should feel. When I offered Eldon the role of caretaker, he didn't answer at first. He just looked at the barn, at the sanded floors and the way the evening sun spilled through the wide doors, and I saw something ease inside him, something that had been clenched shut since June passed. "You sure you want an old man running this place?" he asked. "I want someone who understands what it means to protect it," I said. He swallowed, nodded once, and that was that. Every morning, Eldon unlocked the barn, swept the dust, watered the planters out front, and every morning, kids on bikes rode past and yelled, "Hi, Mr. Brooks," like he'd always been part of the rhythm of their day. It gave him purpose. It gave him a home that felt like home again. The old HOA greenbelt, once a patch of short, identical grass the HOA guarded like it held buried treasure, was different now too. I tilled it myself and planted 2 long rows of pecan saplings, descendants of the same heritage trees my grandfather and I had planted years ago. Kids wandered between them, chasing each other, weaving through future orchards. Parents lounged under the wide sky without worrying if their chairs were approved outdoor furniture. One afternoon, a woman approached me at the barn, her little boy running circles around her legs. She hesitated, then said, "Thank you for all of this, for giving us our freedom back." And she wasn't the only one. People stopped me in the grocery store, on the ranch road, outside Ranch Commons. They didn't gush, they just spoke simply, honestly, like neighbors who finally felt safe again. "It feels normal now. We can breathe again. This place finally belongs to all of us." One evening at sunset, children ran between the pecan saplings, their laughter echoing through the orchard like wind chimes. Eldon sat on the barn steps polishing a wooden sign for the entrance. And I stood there quietly, realizing something I hadn't known I was waiting to feel. This wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something better. Something honest. Something shared. Juniper Ridge had been reborn, not with walls or rules or authority, but with open land, open doors, and a community that had finally remembered how to be one. I ended up back on my porch the same way I had my first week here. Coffee in hand, boots up on the railing, watching the land breathe under the last stretch of daylight. But this time the silence felt different, not heavy, not uncertain, just earned. In the drawer of my grandfather's old writing desk, I'd found a folded piece of paper days earlier, yellowed around the edges, the ink faded but familiar. His handwriting always leaned forward, like he didn't have time to waste on hesitation. I unfolded it again and read the line I'd already memorized. Land remembers the ones who respect it. He'd written it decades before I was born, long before Juniper Ridge existed, long before anyone imagined a community would rise on borrowed soil and forget the hands that once tended it. He wasn't talking about fences or property lines. He was talking about stewardship, about taking responsibility, even when it's inconvenient, especially then. I hadn't come here looking for a fight. I didn't want to take anyone's roads or parks or peace. All I wanted was fairness, quiet, simple fairness. But sometimes fairness needs a spine behind it. Sometimes peace requires justice first. I thought about Eldon laughing again, kids running through the new orchard, neighbors gathering at ranch commons without fear of fines or rules written by someone who mistook control for leadership. The land felt lighter now, honest, like it could breathe again. My grandfather had been right. Land remembers. And now, so did the people who lived on it. I folded the note, slid it back into my pocket, and watched the last light settle over the ranch, my ranch with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was what remained when truth finally had room to stand. Spring came early that year, one of those gentle seasons where the land seems to exhale before anyone else does. Word filtered quietly through the county one morning. Marla Kensington had been denied early parole. Not for lack of trying, but because she'd spent her time inside exactly as she'd spent her time outside, writing complaints, forming committees, breaking rules she believed didn't apply to her. Even in confinement, she had tried to build a kingdom out of concrete walls. But here, outside those walls, things were growing. The pecan orchard behind Ranch Commons had taken root beautifully. The saplings, thin, fragile things when I planted them, now stretched their branches like they'd remembered the old stories my grandfather used to tell me. Kids raced between them, painting the air with laughter. Eldon sat on the barn steps most afternoons, greeting families as if he'd been waiting his whole life to do just that. Juniper Ridge wasn't the same place anymore. It was open now, neighborly, human, the kind of community people assumed they were buying into before the rules drowned the warmth out of it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked past the old HOA sign, the one that once announced authority, fines, and restrictions in rigid block letters. We'd sanded it down, cut it apart, and rebuilt it into a sturdy garden trellis. Wildflowers climbed its frame, vines curled through the places where the lettering used to be. The land felt honest again. I paused, touching the smooth wood, thinking of my grandfather and all his quiet lessons. Some people build fences to keep others out. My grandfather taught me to build them to mark the truth.